Right, okay. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me at the back? Great, good. So, last week, Paranita introduced our new theme entitled The Great Escape, a fresh take on the wheel of life, a living symbol that encompasses the entirety of existence. She showed how this composite of symbols, this complex composite of symbols and images captures the way we, in our minds, create samsara, conditioned existence. In our lives, we go round and round this wheel of life, imprisoned by our fundamental delusion that we are fixed and somehow separate from the rest of life. And that, in a way, the universe is kind of revolving around us. But the wheel of life also provides a way of escaping from this prison. Not escapism, quite the opposite of that. It's very much facing reality. And it shows us that to escape from the sufferings of samsara, it shows us a way of escaping from the sufferings of samsara to ever increasing positive and expansive states towards the ultimate goal of awakening. Last week, you may have felt a little overwhelmed, perhaps, by the scale and complexity of this image of the wheel of life. But don't worry, we're going to be going into different aspects in some detail over the coming weeks on this theme. Last week, Paranita looked at the central circle, where we have the cock, the snake, and the pig biting each other's tails. And these are symbols for craving, aversion, and delusion. And they're in a way driving us around the wheel of life, driving us around samsara. This week, I'm just going to go over here once. This week, we're going to be looking at this second circle here, okay, which is divided into two parts. And on the left-hand side, as you're looking at it, we have human beings who appear to be going up and reaching up, okay? They're happy, they're smiling, they're reaching up. And on the other side, we've got human beings who seem to be falling down, and things look pretty bad, pretty miserable for them. And this is the symbol for the law of karma. So the title of this week's talk is, Do We Deserve What We Get? Okay. Well, in a way, yes, we do. The Buddha taught that we are moral agents. We are responsible in a way for how we act, speak, and how our mind works. But it's a lot more subtle than simply to say, if I do or say this, then that will happen. It's also a lot more subtle than saying, well, this has happened, I've had this experience, so I must have done something in the past for this to have happened. It's far more complicated, far more subtle than that. But just to go back a bit, the origin of karma is not Buddhist, it's not exclusively Buddhist. Karma is something which actually you can go right back to sort of hundreds of years before the Buddha's time, to almost like a pre-Hindu sort of stage in India, called when there was the Vedic culture. And here, karma was very much linked to the conduct of ritual and the correct conduct of that ritual. And ritual was seen as a way to maintain or influence the sort of cosmic order of the universe. Now, the radical teaching of the Buddha was that what is most important is the intention behind our actions, okay? So it's not just performing a ritual, it's what's behind, what's going on in your mind as you're performing the ritual. And by intention here, we're talking about our volition, our will. So performing ritual is fine if you're doing it with the right frame of mind. But it extends, this form of karma extends to all actions, all speech, and all movements of the mind. So karma is like the ethical quality of our action. But this can only be known if we know the motivation behind it. And this ethical sort of approach, in a way, is very much psychologically based. Okay, it's psychologically based. It's not based on following a set of rules. It's not following a set of rituals. It's very much about what's going on in our minds as we're doing things. And of course, this extends not only to actions, it extends to speech, and it extends to the mind. So I'm using a rather old example here, but the thought of committing adultery, okay, may not be as bad as actually committing it, but the thought itself also has consequences. So it is the thought. Now, traditionally, the way we look at actions of body, speech, and mind is they're divided into two, ethically speaking, just divided into two. So we have kusala, which is usually translated as skillful actions. And these are those which arise from positive intentions like generosity, love, seeing the way things are. And of course, on the other side, we have kusala, which means unskillful actions arising from craving, aversion, and delusion, our old friends that are driving us around samsara. So yeah, at its simplest, the law of karma says that intentional actions of body, speech, and mind will bear fruit. They will have consequences in this life and perhaps the next. Every intentional action modifies us, changes our character in some way, however large or small. So when you see, for example, a tree, you plant a tree, you nurture the tree, and fruit arises, in a sense, the fruit has arisen because you created the conditions. And in the same way, skillful karma leads to positive fruits. These are sometimes called karma vipaka. But of course, unskillful karma results in negative fruits. So if you act or speak in angry ways over a period of time, this will lead to you becoming more and more of an angry sort of person. And equally, of course, acts of generosity or kindness will change you into a more positive sort of version of yourself. And we all know this. We all know this. So either in a way, ethically, we're either forging some sort of heavy chain around our neck, as Blake describes it, a mind-forged manacle. Or by contrast, we are making a sort of a beautiful garland of flowers. Now, during this talk, I'm going to be reading lines and verses from a very famous set of verses called the Four Reminders, the Morning Puja, and you can collect this as you walk out. And there's a key line here, right in the middle of it, which says, "The karma I create shapes the course of my life." Okay, the karma I create shapes the course of my life, and that is really getting to the heart of karma. But what I want to ask you is, do you really believe it? Do you really believe it? A few, probably a month or so ago, I was talking about ethics, and I mentioned two examples of my childhood, and I'm going to repeat them because actually they seem even more relevant to today than they did then. So I was a 10-year-old boy attending a junior school, and I was in class one day, and I was pulled out of class, okay, by the head teacher. And I was taken out of the class, and I was accused of having stood on and jumped on a teacher's car, okay. And I really felt I hadn't done it. I had no memory of having done this, but I was told off. I was made to feel ashamed. All sort, I just felt absolutely gutted by what happened, and yet I felt I had done absolutely nothing. So you could say to yourself, well, where is the law of karma there? And equally, I'm sure you can all think of situations where people have had great misfortune, and again, you're thinking, yeah, but they're decent people. They live skillful lives. What on earth is going on? Karma is not straightforward. Take my go forward a few years in my childhood. By then, I was a 13-year-old, not so wise, I have to say. And we had a system in the school where each week you arrived at school with your dinner money, and you bought 5 tokens, different coloured ones for each day of the week, that you then used to get your school dinner. And I really like school dinner. That may make me a bit weird, but I do like school dinner. And one of my friends said, well, I know where they get these plastic tokens from. And I've seen them. I've seen them in a bag in this sort of cupboard. So he and I and a few others went into the cupboard, filled our boots with these tokens, okay, walked out. And as a result, I was able to use these tokens week in, week out, and use the money for other purposes, okay. Brilliant. No comeback. I never got told off. Nobody discovered it. I thought jolly pleased with myself, and so on. Of course, at that time, I hadn't heard of the law of karma. But it does make me wonder what the consequence of that was. So yeah, it's really important to ask ourselves, do we really believe in the law of karma? So that's something I do invite you to think a bit about. Do you really believe that karma shapes the course of your life? Do you really believe that your intentional actions have an impact? Or do you sometimes think if you do something and nobody sees it, it's kind of okay, you can kind of get away with it? Anyway, I'll leave that with you to reflect on. Now, karma is one of these words which has really entered the sort of, one of these Buddhist words that's really entered the common parlance in the West. We use the term a lot, and you often hear it being used and probably misused as well. So I want to go through a few sort of misunderstandings. So one is that karma is somehow, that there's somehow a cosmic enforcer, okay, a cosmic enforcer. Because we've all been brought up, or many of us have anyway, with either Christian or Jewish or Islamic conditioning, where we think there is, we imagine that there is a cosmic enforcer like a God who's punishing and rewarding us, okay, on the back of our behavior. But in karma, there is no cosmic policeman handing out speeding tickets. Or, as I discovered only last month, there's a somewhat less than cosmic speed camera catching you. There's no such thing. There's no Judge Dredd meting out justice. Sangha captures this really well when he said that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have nothing to do with meting out justice. They do not administer the law of karma. They may see all sorts of unskillful things about you, but at the same time, they are completely with you. It's not that they're going to approve or indulge in your wrongdoing, not at all. But neither are they going to withdraw their compassion. Okay. So the next sort of misunderstanding is sometimes that it's fatalism, that karma is seen as fate. And there is a view that there's nothing you can do about it. And indeed, in traditional Indian society, for example, there is a view that if you're born into a caste, it's simply your duty to lead out that allotted life because it's happened, it's arisen because of something you did in the past. So you just kind of get on with it. But I think we have to be very wary of assuming that people deserve their lot in life, because karma has been used to blame people for their lot in all sorts of ways. I mentioned caste, but also I think in our society we have it in relation to social class, socio-economic group, even in relation to disabilities. Around 25 years ago, an English football manager called Glenn Hoddle was sacked for arguing that people with disabilities have done something unskillful in the past to deserve their disability. He claims he was taken out of context. I've since read some of what he said, and I think it's fairly clear what he said. But as you can imagine, there was a huge uproar, and he was duly sacked. But to be fair to Glenn Hoddle, apart from the fact he was a very skillful footballer and played for my favourite football team, Tottenham Hotspur, he's not the only one who said these things. There have been many Hindus and even Buddhists who've articulated sometimes this view. So I think it's really important that we go a bit deeper into what we mean, where karma comes from. Because karma is very much linked to the most fundamental, I think, teaching of the Buddha, that whatever comes into existence, could be this talk, could be an orange, could be the chair you're sitting on, whatever comes into existence does so in dependence on conditions. And in the absence of those conditions, ceases to exist. So if a chair leg breaks, you fall off. It's the very foundation of Buddhism, Paticca. In a way, it's quite obvious. But the Buddha was really, really careful to point out that actually This truth I've discovered is very deep, very subtle, and going against the grain of the world. So, yeah, it's hard to sort of see things in a different way. So, yes, of course, in a sense, it's helpful and convenient to have a talk, think about an orange, to think about a seed. But it's also something of a delusion. They're just labels. Now, karma is this idea of conditionality playing out on the ethical plane. If we undertake an intended action, whether skillful or unskillful, it will have an effect, i.e., it conditions our future. But just to really nail this common sort of error around karma, is that karma is not the only sort of level of conditionality. It's not, if you like, the universal principle that explains everything. And this is seen really clearly in a traditional Buddhist teaching called the Five Niyamas, which I think in its original form was set out by Buddhaghosa, who was a commentator in the 5th century, Theravada commentator. It's been since modified, but the basic principles, I think, are really, really helpful to understanding what's going on. See, we have Janet's fine handwriting, much better than mine. So, yeah, according to this teaching, there are sort of 5 levels of conditionality, okay? So the first one we have is utu nima, and this applies to sort of non-organic matter. In terms of modern science, we'd see this as physics and chemistry. So it has to do with the law of gravity, electricity, chemical reactions, and so on. Okay, so that's the first level of conditionality. We then have bija niyama, which applies to living organisms. Okay, the rules, if you like, the regularities that apply to living organisms, and this covers biology, covers botany, physiology. So it includes things like photosynthesis, genetics, circulation of blood, and so on. I'm not saying for 1 minute that these are simple cause and effect laws, but you get what I'm talking about. There's a whole set of conditions operating at these 2 levels that have a massive impact on our lives. I promise you the science lesson will be over in a minute, but we've got manonema, okay, which is the conditionality which operates in the animal kingdom. And this covers things like perception and so on, but it also includes not only zoology, but also behavioral science, because this covers instincts, animal instincts, okay? And these three levels, the sort of physics, the chemistry, the biology, the behavioral science, and so on, all of these things, in a way, are often out of our control. And this is really, really important, and yet they have a huge impact on our life. Now, it's only at the 4th level that we get the karma coming in, karma nima. Okay, and this comes into play once the mind becomes self-reflective and you have a sense of self. Apparently, this is a key moment in childhood development, And in a sense, with this awareness, what makes us different perhaps from animals is that we're kind of aware of our awareness, okay? So we're bringing in a degree of self-consciousness, and it's this awareness which means that we now have a choice about what we do. So the karma nima is conditionality played out on the ethical plane. It's the way our intended actions, skillful or unskillful, bring about effects on the world. So it means, in effect, you could see it this way, that in a way reality is inherently ethical. Now the last level, more mysteriously perhaps, is the dharma nima, which is like the spiritual plane, and specifically is about the conditions leading to Buddhahood. And there's not much that can be said about that, except that it is the greatest and most sublime of mysteries. And in the end, it's beyond karma nima, so it's beyond what we can do. And it's often something that initially we can glimpse. We can get a glimpse, if you like, of a sense of something beyond our narrow sort of self-clinging. You know, a vision, if you like, an initial vision, which leads us to personal transformation. So, what's the implications of all this? Well, what it means is that something can happen to you, or indeed to anyone around you, for a variety of reasons. And the karma nima is only one cause, okay, one potential cause. Because obviously at the most basic level, there can be an earthquake, which is unlikely to be karma. It's more likely to be due to physics. Or someone can be born disabled, and that can be due to genetics, or it can be to congenital accident. One of my sons, for example, was born with quite a serious heart defect that needed an operation. It was just something that happened. It was just an accident. But it's really hard to isolate how karma has affected things with all these other things going on. So I just wanted to quote another verse from the Four Reminders, which says, "But however I act, life always has difficulties. No one can control it all. But beware, that doesn't get us off the hook. Not for one moment. There are all kinds of ways that our intentional actions have consequences in their own right, or through an interaction perhaps with these other levels. So we don't avoid the law of karma, since our intentional actions will have consequences, even if it's not always obvious how." So now I just want to move on to something else very much related to karma, which is karma and rebirth, okay? Because this Tibetan wheel of life traditionally described the rounds of death and rebirth, okay? So it was about going around multiple lives, one life after the next. And the aim of the spiritual life was actually to escape from these rounds of death and rebirth. Now, in most traditional Buddhist countries, this is not seen as a problem. Rebirth is seen as something that's pretty obvious. But here in the West, with our materialist conditioning, we often are a bit challenged, okay? Let's be honest. Now, it was 2008. Sangha, the founder of Triratna Buddhist Order, came and visited Sheffield Buddhist Centre. He came here. In fact, I think he was standing pretty well near this spot, somewhere around here. And I was sitting in the audience. I hadn't been coming to the centre for that long. And it was a great honour to have Sangha coming here, founder of the order. He was an elderly gent by that stage. He came here and he gave a talk, and I was really looking forward to it. I thought, brilliant. I'm going to get this great Buddhist teaching, you know, some further insights into no self or something like that. No, none of it. He talked about rebirth. And I was really disappointed. I was really frustrated because why is he talking about rebirth? I don't like rebirth. I prefer to avoid it as a topic, thank you. You know, I know it's sometimes associated with Buddhism, but I don't really like the idea at all. As it happens, I've since read the talk, and even if you don't believe in rebirth, there's some fantastic stuff in it. So I really recommend it if you get a chance to listen to it. But of course, rebirth's been around in Western culture for a long time. Christians believe in rebirth. You die, and depending on the life you led, you end up in heaven or hell. You are reborn in heaven or hell for eternity. At least with Buddhism, we're saying actually it's not for eternity, it's not permanent, you get more chances, okay? So that's worth bearing in mind. But we do have this sort of materialist conditioning to contend with. I think we probably assume, whether we realize it or not, that our mind, including our awareness and our ability to see our awareness, we think it arises from our body. It arises probably from the grey matter, sort of up here. So when the body dies, of course, we sort of assume, don't we, in the back of our mind, that the mind therefore ceases in all aspects. And this actually is nihilism. Now, I'm not going to try and convince you of the truth of rebirth. To be honest, I'm not completely sure how it works at all, but I just want to say a few things which is interesting. So the first thing is, in traditional accounts of the Buddha's enlightenment, it tells us that he saw his past lives. He's quite clear about that. All Buddhist traditions and schools, while disagreeing on a lot of stuff, okay, none of them disagree with rebirth, okay? Tibetan, Zen, Theravadan, wherever you go. Many Buddhists have claimed that they get a glimpse or a sense of the truth of rebirth in meditation, for example. And there are, if you're more sciencey minded, there are numerous accounts of children appearing to remember past lives. It tends to be children because the memories tend to die out as they get older. Indeed, there have been some major studies of research undertaken interviewing children about their past memories. And I mean, it still may not convince many people, but nonetheless, it is interesting because in many cases, these researchers are really looking into how could these children have remembered places a long way away that they've never been to, and they're still pretty young, remember. So, you know, it's an interesting body of work in its own right. But whatever you believe, rebirth is complex and subtle because Buddhism is not saying we have a fixed, unchanging soul which is reborn, or more accurately, perhaps reincarnated. But it's a volition or bundle of tendencies. In other words, it's something connected to karma, which is being passed from one life to another, rather like a candle lighting another candle. There is a sort of continuity, but there isn't the same being. Now, of course, you could believe, and many Western Buddhists, I think, see it in this way, that we are being reborn in a way all the time, from one moment to the next. There's no need, in a way, to believe in literally multiple lives. The body and mind in this life is dependent on conditions. And these conditions are changing all the time, from one moment to the next. And these conditions include our intentional actions, our karma, from preceding moments in our life. You can imagine it's rather like a continuous sort of stream, never the same from one moment to the next, but very much dependent on what went before. You could go on to say, well, if this process continues throughout your life, why would it stop just because your body dies? You know, I'll leave you to reflect on that. Sangha, by the way, didn't say that you have to believe in rebirth and death in the literal sense to be a Buddhist. It's not required, indeed, and it's certainly not required to believe in rebirth to accept the truth of karma as well. But if you believe you only have one life and that rebirth is limited to this life, then you better get on with it. You've only got one lifetime, okay? You've only got one lifetime. In traditional Buddhist societies, they acknowledge that, you know, they think about future lives as well. They see it as a sort of a multiple life sort of activity. But if you don't believe in rebirth, you've got to get on with it. So this reminds me of another verse from the Four Reminders. This human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken, but this body is impermanent. Ready or not, one day I shall die. So how does karma play out? You will be changed by your intentional actions, for sure, but however, it's not, as I've said, it's not a simple iron law. Some karma might be quite weak and effectively fade out over time. But there is also counteractive karma, apparently, and I was trying to figure out how that might work. But one might be, for example, if you do something unskillful, you might recognize it, you might apologize, you might try and make amends. So there are sort of counteracting things that you can do in the face of karma. But over time, of course, we are probably committing quite a large number of intentional actions of body, speech, and mind, positive and negative. So how does that play out? Well, traditionally, there are different kinds of karma. I just wanted to mention two. One I always like the sound of is called weighty karma. Okay, weighty karma. And Sangha says weighty karma means very serious karma or karmas, those which represent or which embody very strong conscious volitions in which one's whole being, as it were, has been involved, whether skillful or unskillful, such as to powerfully modify and affect one's whole mental state, one's whole character. So heavy duty stuff. So this traditionally includes obviously taking lives or other sort of horrible acts of violence. You won't be surprised to hear that heavy karma tends to be the first in line, you know, when we're trying to work through karma. Now, I'm assuming none of us have been involved in major acts of violence, but I do still get a sense of the weightiness of karma, in the sense that there are some things that I can reflect on in my life where I think, yeah, that has had quite a big impact, positive or negative, quite a big impact. And sometimes it is worth reflecting. It is worth reflecting. As I say, it can be very hard to pin anything down on a particular action, but sometimes it might be something that was very big, and you can see the ripples, you can see the effects. But I think the thing that's most relevant to us is habitual karma. Those small, little, everyday things, both skillful and unskillful, that add up. The drip, drip, drip of the accumulation of our actions. On the negative side, it could be petty resentments, regularly stealing, road rage, all sorts of comparatively little things that happen on a daily basis. Or, of course, it could be regular acts, skillful acts of generosity and kindness that you do, again, on a regular sort of basis. And this too can add up over time. So regular acts of generosity will over time mean, for example, you become a more generous person. This is how karma works. Maybe you start from a small beginning and build it up until you end up with a tree that's laden with fruit. I'm sure you can think of other sort of skillful and unskillful habits. I think chanting mantras can be a skillful habit. Another one, though, that's really brought out is meditation. Regular meditation practice is a way of working with our minds to develop contentment, love, clarity. Again, this is a practice that might start small, and some days you may feel reluctant to meditate. You may think, well, I can only do 5 minutes, what's the point? Well, I think what the teaching here is saying that even a fairly modest habit of meditation can grow and accumulate and bear fruit. And over time, you will experience higher, deeper mental states. And traditionally, as you develop your meditation, it can end up becoming weighty karma. It can end up being weighty karma. So meditation is really, really important practice. Sangha actually himself says that meditation can modify the whole character, the whole being, the whole consciousness. Why wouldn't you meditate? So just to conclude, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. So the key message from Buddhism is we can change, and the idea that what we do now, karma, has a powerful effect on the person we will become, karma vipaka. Though at times, say in relation to habitual karma, it can feel like trying to shift the direction of an oil tanker rather than some super responsive motorbike like we have on our poster. I think it was Vidanya who wrote this. The Buddhist path works by using the law of karma. It tells us we're always changing, but if we act, speak, and think in certain ways with skillful intention, this change becomes spiritual growth. If we practice the Dharma, we will accumulate positive karma, merit, and our future will be happier as a result. We will spend time in the more pleasant parts of the castle in the wheel of life, which is nicer than being in horrible places. And more importantly, we will spend time where the secret door to freedom can be found. So this brings me to the last 2 verses in the 4 reminders. Only the Dharma can free me and others from suffering forever. Therefore, I recall my heart's longing for freedom and resolve to make use of every day and night to realize it. Thank you.